Okay. Mic check. 1, 2. Mic check 1, 3. Okay. Live. Alright. So I fell asleep this morning. I was expecting to go live at 9 and I fell asleep. I'm sorry, guys. Okay. I need to fix some things. Okay, I'm testing this. I'm testing this out. Okay. Yeah. Okay. I would like a bit. Alright, this is just a practice stream. Right? Okay. Practice streaming. I was supposed to go live at 9. I mean, I don't expect everything to go without a hitch my first run. So my hair is looking flat as shit. Happens. Okay. Now that things are in order, okay, be able to see the world map more. I'm gonna be able to see the world map. People should be able to see the world map. Mm-hmm. Okay. It's got a little American ensemble today. Okay. Hello, hello, hello. Hello, 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 hello. Okay, I might need a better mic. quickly test everything to make sure this playback. Hello. Can you guys hear me? Sorry, I am running late today. I fell asleep and I had it scheduled and, all that. Thank you. Okay. So I am just testing some things out to make sure that the sound is good, that I look good, that the camera angles are... Don't pay attention to that. That's a mess. The camera angles are decent. Okay. So today, I'm gonna wait until more people get here, obviously, but we can still just discuss whatever. So yeah, like it's seriously just a mess today. Well, I don't expect my first stream to go off without a hitch, so it's bound to happen. I was up early this morning doing the research and everything, and I had everything ready to go at 9, and I passed out. So that's why I'm going live now, which is a bit late, but it's okay. We can still work with this. This is still workable. So yeah. So while we wait, is there anything anybody would like to contribute or share? Like perhaps there's something going on in the news regarding this, or there's an article that you saw that would pertain to this that you'd find it very fascinating. Please, link it in my chat. So this has apparently been like an ongoing issue for a while. Arrests being made in Ottawa as we speak. Wow, Perth. Damn. Yeah. Let's go into that. So I'm not familiar with the I'm familiar with the trucker, protests. And I was aware, last I heard, I know that Trudeau enacted the Emergencies Act to tone down all of the white supremacy and stuff that was going on with it. Apparently Pat King was finally arrested. Ooh. Okay, so Pat King, he's the right-wing thought leader responsible behind all this, correct? I can look that up too. That's correct though, right? He's the thought leader behind all this. Patrick King of Red Deal, Alberta wins court case. No, that's old. Okay. See, I'm getting old fucking shit. He was fined in 2021 for violating Alberta Public Health Act for being a group larger than 10 on December. Holy shit. So this guy's got multiple arrests already. Shit. Oh, he was also arrested in 2019 too. What the fuck? This guy. This guy is a thought leader. Okay. So he's a alt-right thought leader, I take it. So they got, do you have any news footage or any articles linking that, Perth, that we can check out? Because I'd really like to see that. If we could probably like just put it in the chat at least. I don't know how to do like double way streaming right now. But we can link it in chat and we can discuss it. So yeah, there, like, I found a number of articles that have been illustrating this point. Now, like, a lot of people, like, you hear this a lot, especially more in Canada, and than by Americans, but like there's this whole like misunderstanding, this misrepresentation of Canada as being like better than the US. And I don't know, I'm not going to say that Canada is better or worse than the United States when it comes to stuff like this. I would say it's probably about the same, if not equal, in terms of systemic racism. Systemic racism in Canada has been a problem for many decades. And of course, they would like to downplay it. You've seen this in American, media as well. Like we downplay our systemic racism as well. I mean, we've been doing it less so of late with, things like George Floyd, and there's always some people who are going to be like, no, it's not because of systemic racism. Systemic racism doesn't exist, blah, blah, blah. You've heard these really dumb arguments before in the past. But in Canada, there's more of a culture of, that denialism, like, because like they're supposed to be seen as like this nice place. And I'm not saying that Canada isn't a nice place. I'm sure it is. But they do have systemic racist issues in government and society and culture. And so we're going to be taking a bit of a deep dive into that today. Okay, so arrest being made in Ottawa as we speak. Apparently Pat King was finally arrested. Emergency Act was invoked, not enforced as of yet. Vote should have been voted on by Hawk today, but police and provinces actually started to do their jobs. Oh, fun. And we might not need the EA for following money. Okay, I'm at work. I might find some stuff to add later. Oh, better real Canadians are too polite to say that. Well, you're polite enough to say it. Besides, when it comes to racism, I wouldn't apply better is good. Right. Well, I mean, it's not a competition either, right? Like, which country is more systemically racist, and like that's not something we should be fighting over. We should be fighting systemic racism. But essentialist denialism is really big in Canada. I'm not saying that we don't have a bit of that type of denialism in America, but it's a really big thing in Canada. So the big picture, recent incidents of systemic racism seem to point to a troubling pattern of discrimination. Multiple institutions of the country, including healthcare, education, employment, and among others. The glossary of the data standards for identification and monitoring systemic racism defines systemic racism as consisting of organizational, cultural, policies, directives, practices, or procedures that exclude, displace, or marginalize some racialized groups or create unfair barriers for them to assess valuable benefits and opportunities. Okay, so this is just basically an overview first and foremost of what systemic racism is. It's something that is instituted on the basis of, it's basically it impacts your entire life from institutions in all aspects of the system. So like healthcare, schooling, you can't even go to like work without having to deal with it. Against the indigenous community, these are all recent patterns. Okay, so we're going over recent patterns now. On September 29th, 2020, in a hospital in Joliette, Quebec, a woman named Joyce Esquan live streamed a video on Facebook right before her death, capturing nurses degrading her with insults and profanities directed at her indigenous background. Only one of the nurses in the video has been fired. Okay, that's a pretty severe example of systemic racism. The mother of 7's death was deemed not acceptable by Quebec Premier Francis Legault, who has acknowledged racism in the province but denied this case being one of systemic racism. How? How, dude? Mary Hannaberg, vice president of Quebec, Native woman, said the nurse's statements in the video are of a racist nature. Retired Superior Court Justice Jacques Fine's report from the same month stated, it is impossible to deny that Indigenous people in Quebec are victims of systemic discrimination in assessing public services. Of course, there's another big, huge recent example is murdered and missing Indigenous women and girls. MMIW in Canada still have continued to occur at high rates, despite the completion of a national inquiry. Between 2016 2019, more than 130 Indigenous women and girls reported victims of homicide, suspicious death, or died in institutional care. So, like, there's a lot more women and children who are experiencing this in institutions too. So it's not just like them going missing, but on top of the women going missing, they're dying, and it's suspicious in institutionalized care. So like places like group homes and whatnot. Against the Black community in September 2020, a 10-year-old Black boy was attacked by two white boys of the same age in the township of Russell, Ontario. He was attacked with a scooter, called racial slurs, including the N-word, and suffered a broken arm. His mother said she does not feel safe in the area anymore, and that police were slow to respond and enact repercussions, saying the attack was consensual. How is attack? You know what? I'm just going to leave that one. It's not a crime to call someone the N-word, he said, as well, in addition to that. Okay, so the attack was consensual, and it's okay to say the N-word. This is a cop telling a scared, bereaved Black mother this, and they didn't do anything about it. That's an obvious example of systemic racism happening in that culture. A principal in Calgary was caught on video saying the N-word in front of a group of Black students. The students who captured the video were suspended, and the principal has not yet apologized, despite a University of Ottawa law professor saying the suspended students can sue the school. Like, oh, well, you can sue them if you don't like it. Like, yeah, how the heck are they going to freaking do that? This is just for videoing. This is just for videoing somebody behaving racist so that they can document the systemic racism that's occurring. So, like, they're not even allowed to document what's happening to them. This is ridiculous. This is getting insane. Okay. So, Muslim and Islamophobia attacks. Multiple Toronto mosques have been attacked or vandalized with racist graffiti this past year alone. Muslim communities are calling for the police to investigate these hate crimes. Earlier this fall, Muslim man Mohammed Aslim Zaifs was stabbed to death outside the International Muslim Organization Mosque of Ontario. Following pushback from the Muslim community, Toronto police changed their investigation into Zaif's homicide as first-degree murder with the possibility of a hate crime, despite their initial statement saying there was no known motive of the accused. So basically, a guy attacks somebody at a mosque. They do an actual serious like a terrorist attack against this group of people with the intention of just purely hating Muslims, and that's not a hate crime. No, why would it be? There's no known motive. Come on. You see this a lot with like active shooters of mosques and synagogues, as if the active shooter is usually white. They'll usually try to downplay it. They do this in our own media as well, where it's like, oh, we don't know the motive, even though the motive is pretty obvious, which is it's racially motivated. When the Quebec City mosque attack happened, many of us prayed that this would be the last time we lost community members to Islamophobia and hate. We were wrong, said Mustafa Farouk, CEO of the National Council of Canadian Muslims, NCCM, about recent murder of Mohammed Aslim Zaifs. I'm probably butchering this pronunciation, but I'm trying. At the IMO mosque, as the number of alt-right and neo-Nazi groups grow in Canada, we now know that without action today, it will simply be a matter of time before the next attack. So, like, they're not doing anything about this. And at the same time, the media is basically like going like, we don't know when there's going to be a next one. They're bull-faced being like, we don't know when there's going to be a next one, but it's definitely not what you think it is. I'm sure it'll go away. It'll just go away, right? Anti-Asian discrimination. A recent article from September 2020 depicts an increase in anti-Asian racism in Canada, outnumbering those in the United States. Wow, this includes physical assault, racial slurs, and threats, seemingly exacerbated by COVID-19, particularly in BC. Following COVID-19 outbreaks in Alberta, Cargill meat packing plant, many Filipino workers were scapegoated for the spread of the virus. This was despite the fact that the report showed the company and government inspectors failed to enforce proper safety measures and regulations causing the outbreak. Wow. So it's the freaking company's fault, and they're gonna blame all of the Filipino workers for this. That's called doing a fascism. Even Canada's Chief Health Minister Theresa Tam's loyalty was questioned by Conservative MP Derek Sloan, who asked if she was working for China or Canada. Wow. Yeah, we saw that a lot too with like people here, like constantly being like, oh, you're in cahoots with China. Like I believe Trump said that about Fauci, right? Calls for action. Various advocacy groups are trying to raise money, awareness, and action against hate crimes and systemic racism attacks. Okay, so that's good. I mean, but then I'm looking at this chart, and it's so sad to look at because it's like nil to nothing that's being raised over the course of the 3 years. Oh, but these are dated stats too, by the way. It's from 16 to 2018. But the link's in the comments. So like these stats, I'll also post this on Twitter. These stats are really sad. It's like, oh, we're just gonna give it, there's like just tiny minuscule amounts of funding towards it. As part of the National Inquiry to Missing Murdered Indigenous Women and Girls interim report, the Government of Canada has allocated $5 million to fund health and support services of families of missing and murdered Indigenous women and girls, support a national oversight at the Royal Canadian Mounted Police, and review police policies and practices. Okay, so they're still in the process of doing this. Basically, they're still looking into this, and they're like, their solution to the problem is we're just gonna throw money at it, right? Because if we throw money at it, maybe it'll solve itself. That's really not how it works. And I believe the Illuminati, Blair, she did an amazing video covering this. I will link her video. Well, actually, her video is in my playlist, so go check out her channel and subscribe to her. She's wonderful. But yeah, she did an amazing video covering the missing Indigenous women and girls. It was pretty in depth that I thought was very eye-opening. The inquiry aims to prevent systemic violence and other issues by eliminating gender discrimination, enacting legislation respecting Indigenous languages, and reforming child and family services systems. Yeah, the child services, I'm not sure if you guys are aware of this. I mean, I know Perth, you are. But it's really bad over there, where there's like a lot of corruption kind of going on. And if you're Indigenous, you are 10 times more likely to be targeted with this kind of corruption. So those departments are in need of like some serious reform. So there's more to that. MP Pablo Rodriguez said that more than 13 million commemorations and initiatives are making a concrete contribution to the Government of Canada's efforts to raise awareness for this national tragedy and put an end to it. This project is making real difference in the lives of people in Nunavik. I'm probably butchering that, but it's also the entire province. Okay, so, but this is also like more than just this province too, right? Like they're putting a ton of money at it, and they're like, they've got these good intentions, and they're like, yeah, we're gonna fix this, right? But here's the thing: if there was no systemic racist issue in Canada, we wouldn't have to be, putting so much effort towards fixing the issue. So that to me is telling. The fact that they're throwing like this much money on it, and like it says a lot that they want this problem to go away, because it's mostly because they don't like the fact that it makes them look bad. They don't like the fact that it makes Canada look racist, and throwing money at it, like, while like that's not really going to help the issue overall, but I guess like every little bit helps. But they need to be doing more than just throwing money at the problem. They should be actually like enacting and reforming laws, and like they plan on reforming the child services thing, but like they need to be doing more than that. The NCCM is calling for the Government of Canada to dismantle white supremacy and neo-Nazi groups that threaten Black, Indigenous, Jewish, Muslim, Ski, and other communities. Okay, see, that's good. That is good. A call to action like that can gain a lot of traction. In an open letter to PM Trudeau, the NCCM stated this attack is one in a long series chain of horrifying attacks of racialized communities in Canada. And this is true. This is true. We've seen it with like the Indigenous missing women, and we've seen it with like the shootings. Like they have, shootings with, African Americans as well, as much as they do here. That's been heavily downplayed in the media as well. Advocate Robin Brown of 613-819 Black Hub said he reached out to the Ontario Provincial Police, Russell's detachment, and principal of the school of the alleged white boys who attacked the 10-year-old black boy to investigate systemic racism within the police department and punishment of racist language for the boys. Okay, so there's been a lot of pushback, basically, and a lot of downplaying and denialism in the media. So like this happens a lot in Canada, and if you're just like, if you are still one of those white people who is saying systemic racism doesn't exist, and in the same breath being like, I'm not a racist, you're a liar. You're just a liar. Get your head checked. Because this is definitely indeed happening, and we should be aware of it, and we should be pushing back on it. Like I know that there's like this constant like understanding of, well, it doesn't impact me, so I'm not going to do anything about it. That's extremely wrong, and I want people to get out of that line of thinking, because it does impact you. Are you going to wait until, like, okay, so you say you're not racist. Are you going to wait until that black friend of yours that you use to justify the fact that you're not racist gets shot? Are you going to care then? Because this is happening. This is happening all over Canada, and this is happening all over the United States. And we need to be more aware of it and more tactful when it comes to pushing back on it and dealing with it. Okay, so here's like this other article that I found, and it says systemic racism, what it looks like in Canada, how to fight it. At UBC, our commitment to building an open environment and a diverse workforce makes us stronger. It increases the complexity of our knowledge with which we can transform systems of oppression, support emerging leaders to better shape the university and a broader society. However, we recognize that even in diverse institutions like ours, in Canada, systemic racism still exists as a challenge for racialized communities and Indigenous peoples. So what is systemic racism? Systemic racism, also known as institutional racism, refers to the ways of that whiteness and white superiority become embedded in the policies and processes of an institution, resulting in a system that advantages white people and disadvantages people of color, notably in employment, education, justice, and social participation. Systemic racism in Canada. In a settler colonial state like Canada, systemic racism is deeply rooted in every system of this country. This means the systems put in place were designed to benefit white colonists, so basically the same as the U.S. It's this, I mean, okay, it's not identical. Like, yes, I know our histories are different, but it's not dissimilar. Okay, they weren't born in the womb of the Queen of England and, came out pure. Like that's not how any of this works. The systems put in place were designed to benefit white colonists while disadvantaging the Indigenous populations who had lived here prior to colonialism. This power dynamic continues to be upheld and reinforced in our society, extending its impact on new racialized citizens. So basically what they're saying is like most of the systemic racism that impacts in Canada is Indigenous. However, it has evolved over time as new people come in, more racism begins. So that's just lovely. According to a 2016 report from Statistics Canada, both Black women and men were less likely to obtain post-secondary education compared to women and men in the rest of the population in Vancouver, with a difference about 10% and the unemployment rate for the Black population with approximately 1.5 times higher than that for the rest of the population. In terms of socioeconomic impact, COVID-19, around 1/4 of Indigenous people living in Canada urban areas were in poverty compared to 13% of non-Indigenous population in these areas. Wonderful. I mean, I say that sarcastically, if you can hear my tone. Wonderful. So, how to fight systemic racism. Systemic racism is a ripple effect from years of racist and discriminatory practices. And as individuals, it is normal to feel discouraged and powerless, but know that from being more mindful of the ways to work to promoting social accountability, you too can take a lead in initiating change. All right, so here, and they give us some steps. All right, step 1, reflect. Accepting that racism lives within our society is an important first step. I agree. Reflect on the ways systemic racism and your position has impacted you and your perspectives. The experiences or marginalized groups can also vary, so don't forget to apply intersectional lens when you consider the ways different groups face oppression. You may feel uncomfortable, but this sets a solid foundation for you to explore complexities of racial discrimination, challenge your notions of race and culture, and see anti-racism in new ways. Okay, so this is great because I like that they're saying we should challenge our way of thinking with this article. Like this one is actually telling you like how you can actually fight against it. And as a dumb white American, I feel like I need to know that. Educate. In order to move forward, it is essential to confront our past with racism and oppression as a country. Having knowledge and understanding in Canada's history with racism provides us with necessary foundation to the fight against injustice. As you learn more about Canada's history with racism, ask yourself the following questions. How have the laws changed? Is the targeted group still experiencing the effects of this event today? Were you familiar with this historical event? If not, what is the significance of you not knowing about this event? So that is interesting because it's basically breaking down like how we need to think about this, like, and compare and contrast, like some things like if you didn't hear about Trayvon Martin, like imagine for a minute you didn't hear about Trayvon Martin, like could you imagine like finding that out and then finding out an additional like tons of Black people and just the numbers just keep growing have been affected by police overextending their power. Like you'd be like, why didn't I hear about this? Like, why wasn't this all over the news? Like something like that should be talked about. And the fact that there are instances where these cases aren't even reported to the public, that is very systemically racist. Like that is an indication that something isn't right going on. They're trying to cover it up, basically. Speak up, challenge yourself and your communities by bringing conversations into your spaces. Hi, we're speaking up today about systemic racism in Canada. Like and subscribe and follow below. Challenge yourself and your communities by bringing conversations into your spaces, regardless of your intersectional identities. Talking about racism is not an easy task. Your ability to have more meaningful and productive conversations will grow as you practice more. We also encourage you to read our, okay, so that's just other articles, but yeah. So lots of interesting information to dive into here. So I'm going to check the comments real quick. Oh, Perth, you're blowing me up. Okay. And denialism is bad, but mostly on one side of the fence. Well, yeah, it's mostly white people who have a denialist issue. Like when I say denialism, I'm talking about whitey. Just keep that in mind. It's pretty bad and skyrocketing. Bad rumor. Yeah. Alberta MP trying to say Trudeau tongue. Party Canada. Wow. Jason Kenney, Alberta MP, trying to say Trudeau's tongue-in-cheek called the Conservative Party of Canada a bunch of Nazis. They are a bunch of Nazis. Like, how is that, like, not saying he did, but, like, how's that wrong? Like, call a spade, why don't we? You know? Child Services has a horrible reputation in Canada. Yeah, they do. With the public, at least, no matter the community, but yes, for Indigenous Child Services is a whole other beast and a whole separate organization. Yeah. And we can go into that. We could definitely, because, like, I think if we compared and contrasted alongside the two, like, you know, the type of child care services that white people have access to versus the child care services Indigenous people have access to or don't have access to. I think that is one of many ways that we can really highlight the fact that, yeah, this systemic racism is indeed happening in Canada, because it's something that's at the institutionalized level, right? Like, if you have a whole separate organization that deals with Indigenous folks versus a whole separate organization that deals with white folks, and they get the special preferential treatment, like white folks get preferential treatment versus, Indigenous people, that's pretty bad. Like, that's an extreme, I would say. Like, if you're even, like, segregating the different organizations, that's pretty systemically racist. Hi, Kitty. This is my baby Caesar. He's coming on too. He wants to be loved. Say hi, Kitty. Kitty's saying hi. Kitty wants to be in the stream. Yeah, it can apply, like, because when we're talking about systemic racism, it can apply in any institutional context. So, like, if it's a major institution, if it's a major government institution that's meant to be a service for the community, and there's, like, a discrimination that's going on, you can absolutely say that, yes, this is an example of systemic racism. And hi, you, what do you want? My kitty wants to be on stream. Hello. But yeah, so there's so many, like, just in these two articles alone that I've already cited, there's a lot of examples. They're just citing, like this is like the way the point it's gotten to. We're just gonna cite examples for you of systemic racism occurring in Canada, because nothing quite highlights systemic racism more than to be able to cite an example, and even better, a current example of it occurring, because then they can't say, like, oh, that was the past, like that was the bygone era of the past, that doesn't happen anymore. But it is, like, if you cite something that happened recently, it is currently happening. because the Child Service Association was ordered to stay off indigenous land, and they manage their own child service branch from within their own community. Okay, so that isn't necessarily like, but in a way, okay, so like because of the whole stolen land thing and the fact that they have to live on a reservation, that is already because of historical racism that took place that put them in that position, right? That they needed to form their own community, form their own services within their own community, which is extremely difficult. It's extremely difficult to do, especially when you're living on a reservation. You don't have any resources available to you in the first place. The government's not providing anything. Like, it is still a serious example of systemic racism, because had they not had to deal with that earlier segregation, where that forced them onto a reservation, they wouldn't have the issues that they're dealing with the current system now. So yeah, definitely. I wouldn't say that it's like, oh, we gave you two different. No, I understand that there's like more complicated details on that, but it's because of that whole they took their land and they forced them to live on reservations, so now they have shoddy resources and shoddy services, and it's just a mess. Yeah, it's not just history. This is also like, right, when you can cite something like this that is a current event happening, you better damn well say that it's systemic racism. Yeah, there's a historical connotation to all of this, and like, it began with history, but it is not something of the past. This is definitely something that's currently happening. It's currently occurring, and it's constantly occurring to an alarming degree. Like, I was shocked when I first started hearing about this. Like, I never was like one of those people who's like, oh, Canada, it's so much better than the US, right? Like, I was never that naive about, anything. But like, I didn't realize the extent. Like, I didn't realize to like what degree is this occurring. And once I started learning more about it, I was really shocked. Like, I was in tears, shaking by the end of it, just because like, this is so severe, this is so bad. Like, I can't imagine anything like this like happening to myself. Like, I know that it does happen in America, but I cannot imagine going through something like this. And I've gone through a lot. Like, if you know me, if you know what I've been through, you'd be like, holy crap, how is this person still alive? But yeah, I'm a survivor. But I can, even on top of that, I cannot imagine going through something like this. It's unfathomable to me. It's unfathomable to me because I'm white. I have white privilege, and I'm willing to acknowledge that. I'm willing to set that aside and be like, this is serious. This is really happening. I'm not going to turn a blind eye to it because I've never had it happen to me. I can still recognize what's happening in my culture and other cultures and be like, hey, that shit's wrong. Fucking stop it. And like, really, I feel like that's the that's an attitude we should all adopt, is fucking stop it. Because these are human beings. Like, these are other human beings that most of society doesn't care if this happens to them. And I don't feel right about that. Like, you shouldn't feel right about that. Like, people are in this, like, oh, denialism, dumb head because it makes them uncomfortable. Yeah, it should make you uncomfortable. But you shouldn't turn a blind eye to it just because it makes you uncomfortable. Talk about it. You know, we should talk about it more. I think if more white voices were talking about this in a way that is like, we need to put a stop to this. We need to put an end to this right now. I'm not going to pull any punches. I'm not going to make any excuses for the white race. This is wrong. We need to cut it out. Like, we need to do everything we can in our power. We have to use that white privilege to dismantle this racism, because historically speaking, we've abused our privilege and power to benefit ourselves. And I don't want that to be my legacy. I don't want that to be my children's legacy. I don't want that to be my children's children's legacy. I want it to be turned around, that we can uplift and bolster minorities in a place of equality. And I want that to be my legacy. I want people to come together in love and unity and help each other and put a stop to this violence, because it is extreme violence. I can't imagine anybody just being able, like, if they knew what this entails, if they knew the extreme violence, if we constantly were to, like, cite these examples and list them out and be like, yeah, this didn't happen in colonial times. This happened in 2020. This happened in 2019. This happened in 2022. You know, if we can cite the examples of this happening in our culture and point out to be like, no, this is a modern issue. This is happening right now. More people would begin to recognize and care and want to do something about it to put a stop to it. So I absolutely encourage that. Like, I feel like we need to be on this more. Definitely. All right, let's take a look at the other article here. So, Canada urged to open its eyes, systemic racism in wake of police violence. Amid the anger over brutality and injustice, a number of prominent Canadians have cast doubt on the idea that racism is entrenched. After a string of violent incidents involving the police, activists and ordinary people across Canada have joined a global chorus calling for a reckoning with racism. This is great. Okay. We need, this is what we need. This is exactly what I was talking about here. Policing inequality and the long reach of history. In recent weeks, a Black woman fell to her death after police were called to her flat in Toronto. An Indigenous woman was shot dead by an officer in New Brunswick while he was carrying out a wellness check. Oh yeah, we've seen this a lot happening too in the United States with minorities. Like, oh, wellness check, and then they come in and they shoot the person. We also have this thing going on right now known as, like, no knock warrants, and oh my god, it's a nightmare, because basically what the police can do is they don't even have to knock on your door. They can just come into your house and shoot you without a warrant. And footage emerged showing Royal Canadian Mounted Police officers in Alberta forcing a First Nations chief to the ground and punching him in the head. Yikes. On Friday evening, an Indigenous man was shot dead by the RCMP in New Brunswick. But amid the growing anger, a number of prominent Canadian premiers, columnists, and the head of the RCMP have cast doubt on the idea that racism is entrenched in the country's institutions. Oh, of course they did, because, these higher people in government are going to always be like, no, 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 we're no, no. You see, we have a reason for the crazy shit we're doing. Don't pay attention to what's going on over here. Pay attention to us. Thank God we're different than the United States. Wow. And we don't have the systemic deep roots they've had for years. This is complete bullshit, by the way, said the Ontario Premier Doug Ford. Like, how can you sit there and be like, oh, we're not like those Americans? Really? Like, you clearly must not have been paying attention, dude, because you're exactly like us in every way. In like the bad ways and all the good ways as well. Said the Ontario Premier Doug Ford. View echoed by neighboring Quebec Premier Francis Legault. Okay, so like he hasn't been as great about things either. Like the other articles was like kind of praising him a little bit for like, we're gonna like put forth these initiatives, whatever. But at the same time, he's talking out of the side of his mouth on some shit. The RCMP Commissioner Brenda Lucky told the Globe and Mail on Wednesday, I think that if systemic racism is meaning that racism is entrenched in our policies and procedures, I would say we don't have a systemic racism. Wow. And we just like keep in mind all of the examples I just cited of it being in their government institutions. And then this person is the commissioner of the RCMP, and she's saying, I don't think we have a systemic racism because I don't see it in our institutions. Complete blindness. On Friday, Lucky clarified her position in a statement. I did acknowledge that we, like others, have racism in our organizations, but I did not say definitively that systemic. She does not know what systemic racism is, I think, because she's like, oh yeah, we've got racism in our institutions, but we don't have systemic racism. Let me go back. What was the definition of systemic racism again? Yeah, it's organizational, cultural policies, directives, practices, or procedures that exclude, displace, or marginalize some racialized groups or create unfair barriers for them to access valuable benefits and opportunities. Listen, if you have racism in your institutions, that's systemic racism. So she goes on to say, blah, blah, blah. I'm talking out of my ass. I don't know what I'm talking about. I'm dumb. We like others have racism in our organizations, but I do not definitively say that it's systemic racism. Wow, you sound like a genius. And she says, I should have. Okay. Yeah, you should have. And she sounds like she's like dancing around the issue almost. Like, well, it is and it isn't. You see this a lot too with white people, especially white people in positions of power. Like they want to downplay this. Hours later, Rodney Levi of the Menipeg Mi'kmaq Nation was shot dead by RCMP officers. So shit, like right after she issued these statements, this guy, this indigenous individual gets shot by our RCMP officers. Activists and historians argue that before change can come, Canadians must first accept a tarnished history and the persistent structural iniquities that it has bequeathed the nation. The numbers are clear. Black and Indigenous people in Canada are disproportionately overrepresented in prisons and jails across the country. As students, they face harsher discipline in schools and are suspended at a higher rate than white students. In Toronto, the country's largest Black residents are 20 times more likely to be shot by police. Again, all of this is evidence of systemic racism occurring in Canada. On Thursday, Justin Trudeau contradicted the RCMP chief's comments, saying it was clear systemic racism was present in the country's federal police force. As much as we admire the support the RCMP, we know we need to do better. It's not just the individual examples we have seen, it's the issues faced by Canadians of diverse backgrounds over years, decades, and generations. And again, this is all still going on to this day. So like this, like they love to like just be like, oh, you know, we've got a history. Yeah, you do, but it's still happening. Like this hasn't gone away. Let's not forget that this has not stopped. On Friday, Lucky clarified her position, saying, I did acknowledge that we, like others, have racism in our organizations, blah, blah, blah. So it's basically just repeating the same shtick. So, like, this, yeah. Some argue that Canada's national police force itself is emblematic of racism. The RMCP was not created to protect Indigenous people. It was created to protect white settlers from Indigenous folks. So you're seeing like a similar trend of what happened over there that led to the like systemic racism. It's in there from like the ground up. It was like built from the ground up. Okay, like it was there from its inception of this organization, and it's just persisted to be there for hundreds of years. And you could say that's the case and true for our own police force in America. White suppressing our ceremonies and implementing laws that sought to decimate us, said Brooks Arcand Paul, a Cree lawyer and an executive on the Indigenous Bar Association. Even today, the police will always look at Indigenous people and Black folks and our territories as potentially requiring some kind of suppression. Yeah. Protesters have highlighted the case of Chantel Moore, 26, who was fatally shot last month by officers during a mental health wellness check. And Regis Korchinski-Pakwe, who fell to her death after police responded to a mental health emergency. Mm-hmm. See, as somebody who has mental health issues, like this is absolutely horrifying for me. Can you imagine somebody just like randomly calling a wellness check for you? Their intentions might be good, but then when the police get there, they shoot that person to death. Like, and it's because of their race. Like that's fucking nightmarish. This is nightmare fuel. They said her death was only the latest in a litany of cases where Indigenous lives are lost and families denied justice. He points to the case of Gerald Stanley, a white farmer who shot Colton Boushie, an Indigenous man, in the head, but was acquitted by an all-white jury. Oh, see, so now we're even seeing it in the court systems, because like this is basically how systemic racism works. It's in every institution almost to some degree. Like it's checkered, you know, so it can be hard to identify. But like when you're looking for it, you're really looking for it, like you can see it, like having an all-white jury, things like that, like would definitely be indicative of these things. And the fact that like they were able to shoot them and then get off, like there are layers and tiers of this being present, and how we know it's present is like the severity. When we talk about systemic racism, we're not just trying to lay the blame on the RCMP. It's the entire structure that is causing continued violence against Black and Indigenous bodies in this country. Some police forces, including Canada's largest city, have acknowledged systemic racism exists and pledged to make change last week. Toronto's police chief, Mark Saunders, knelt with protesters. Okay, well, that's not bad. It's not, it's not going to fix anything, but that's nice to have that kind of solidarity. But such actions have also raised skepticism among activism. Police in Canada are trying to escape this moment of criticism by casting themselves compassionate forces that care about these issues. Like, right, like I just said, like, well, that's nice, but that's not going to fix anything. However, once you actually dig into the data, it shows this is not necessarily the case, said Bashir Mohammed, researcher and amateur historian who has highlighted the often forgotten racist history of Western Canada. I think it's by design that police forces want this information hidden, because then it makes them less responsible for actually acknowledging this is a problem. Mohammed points that the practice of carding, Canada's version of stop and frisk, ooh, that's not good, in which police conduct street checks of residents with little or no cause. While agencies have defended the practice in the past, the limited available data shows the policy disproportionately affects racialized communities. Of course it does. Ford, the Ontario Premier, quickly walked back his remarks, suggesting his comments had been taken out of context. Of course, there's systemic racism in Ontario. There's systemic racism across this country, Ford said the next day. Yeah, oh, wow, dude. Wow. Way to just like wipe any deniability away from your record, but with more deniability. Oh, I knew. Like, fuck you, dude. Quebec's Legault also suggested there was no system in place that discriminates in the province, and said that the province had not experienced slavery. Yikes. But political leaders' resistance to the idea that systemic racism exists within state institutions often comes from poor understanding of the country's past, says educator and historian Natasha Henry, president of the Ontario Black History Society. Okay, so basically they're saying, like, there's like this whole culture of denialism involving like actual slavery. Yikes. That's basically like on board, like in the same end of like Holocaust denial. Like, this is just as bad as that. It's part of the Canadian national narrative of positioning ourselves in juxtaposition to the United States. That's how we get this exceptional Canada of being welcoming and warm, and not paying attention to our own parallel history of racial exclusion and dispossession, in addition to being factually inaccurate. This popular view speaks to a refusal to take responsibility for 2 centuries of slavery within the country's history, says Henry. Wow. For generations, Canadian history has concentrated on the country's position as the last stop on the Underground Railroad, a place which meant freedom for those who escaped slavery in the U.S. But the same narrative omits the experiences of thousands of enslaved people within Canada, says Henry. Yeah, I remember, like, even as an American, being taught that in school. Like, I'd say it's completely inaccurate, obviously, and not true. But that, like, oh, they escaped the Underground Railroad in Ohio, and then they like just went completely up, and then as soon as they hit Canada, they were free. Like, no, it didn't end there. Like, it did not end there. According to Henry's research, the earliest record of African enslavement in colonial Canada was the sale of a young boy named Oliver Lejeune in 1629. Slavery was formally ended in the British Empire in 1834, including British North America, but legislation was repeatedly passed that would weaken anti-slavery laws in the years leading up to the abolition. After emancipation, Black people in Canada still faced segregation and the looming threat of hate groups like the Ku Klux Klan. Of course, you have to decide you are going to accept all of Canada or none of Canada, said Henry, because you can't parcel out what you want. That's not how history works. Agree? Indigenous people were also enslaved by colonial powers, a reality often forgotten in the country's school textbooks. Same here. Like, they definitely under acknowledge it, if not don't even teach it in American schools. Like, not just like about what's going on over there, but like what went on here. Like, it's crazy. And by the end of the 1700s, as many as 2,000 Black people were enslaved in the Maritimes region. About 300 or more were enslaved in the area known as Lower Canada, which is now the province of Quebec. And as many as 700 in Upper Canada, Ontario. Others argued that Canada needs more comprehensive history. Yeah, we need more comprehensive history in our schools. Both in Canada and the United States. I think I would agree with that. Because we're like just we're whitewashing history. Yeah, we're taking out all the ugly, difficult, racist elements of history because we don't want our children to be traumatized by such this horrific history, which is not true at all. Like, if you teach kids this, they're just going to become more compassionate. That's actually what we want, right? Like, you can't just like hide the truth. Like, you can't hide. Won't somebody please think of the children? Like, people feel this way about teaching critical race theory in school right now. And in the United States, where they're very afraid to let that more in-depth history in, because then that means like they have to stop. We have to stop being racist pretty much if we do that, because then the kids will never let us off the hook. Well, that's already happening now, and we shouldn't let them off the hook. It's important to incorporate anti-Black racism into curriculum, but also Black history, not just civil rights heroes, but also Black artists. Said Muhammad, this shows that people existed in Canada. That my people existed in Canada. It shows that we have long history of slavery, over 200 years, but also have a long history of Black arts and Black culture. Only in recent years has Canada grappled with the legacy of its residential schools, where many Indigenous students were sent against their will and experienced verbal, physical, and sexual abuse, a period which schools have now started to teach. Yeah, this one's actually pretty close to my heart, because I was made to go to Catholic school, and that was really bad for me. And you can imagine like the type of abuse that went on there. And this is very similar to that, but this is so much worse because it's like it's rooted in systemic racism. So at the end of the day, there's going to be some difficult conversations, because it's important to be acknowledged that our experiences aren't just a fabricated story. They're lived realities. Yeah. People like, and this is people have been pulled over and questioned multiple occasions by police and we are not going to be able to achieve true understanding until at last we're able to share our stories frankly and candidly to a receptive audience. Okay, so that's pretty intense stuff, guys. I'm gonna be right back. My mom needs me for something. But yeah, so keep the comments coming, and if you guys have any questions about this stuff and want to know more, or if you have other articles that you'd like to share, link them in the link it. No. No. What? All right. All right. I'm in the middle of something. Sorry about that. Mom needed help with something. Okay. So, yeah, sorry guys about like any interruptions. I'm new and parents are not always respectful. So yeah. Okay. So there's that. All right. So yeah. And then like there's I want to say this I think we are on the last article here. Yeah. And this one's also got videos to it. So maybe if I can figure out how to do like that dual stream thing. Expand menu. No. Hang on. Oops, menu. All right. So yeah. Let me read the comments here. Things often downplayed as one bad apple. Yeah, like we get that a lot, like especially in like police. Oh, it's just a few bad apples, or it's just one bad apple. Don't bring down the entire police force because of it. And then it's like it is the entire police force that's doing it. Because like multiple case after case after case comes out and they're like, oh, well, that was just a few bad apples. It's like, listen, guys, I don't know if you realize this, but if there's just one bad apple in the barrel, like the rest has been infected with rot. I hate that term now. Oh, it's just one bad apple, or it's just a few bad apples. Like, no, it's not. No, it's not. You put one bad apple in the barrel, the rest are going to be tainted. Yeah, every white voice fighting racism is earmarked as liberal by the players of party politics. Not sure why equality is only as socialist leverage. Yeah. Um God, like I hate the discourse on that too. That is a big one for me because it's like I'm not liberal. Like one, um I definitely am an anarchist and I am white, but I'm not okay with racism. I am okay with defunding the police. I am okay. Oh, I'm okay with, dismantling systemic racism. I'm aware of systemic racism. Um so like yeah, like I understand there's like like a wariness of, white people coming into the conversation and adding their voices to it because they're afraid that, of what they've had to deal with for their, entire history, which is, um, they know that we have power and that we can use it in various ways. And we can use it for good and we can use it for evil. And historically, we've used it more for evil than we have for good. So you kind of have to you have to prove yourself to anybody, I think, now. And I honestly don't blame them for that. Like when you're coming into their space, you kind of have to prove yourself. Um yeah. Skeptical takes say announcements aren't action. I agree. Too many times has someone acknowledged the problem yet did nothing. Right. Right. They're sick of white people, especially white people in power, just like being like, yeah, it's real bad. And then like turning around and being like, okay, we said that it was bad. Now we're moving on. Well, we'll try to do better. That's like, that's like, it's like my ex's line of thinking, actually. It's my ex's line of thinking, I'll do better. I'll do better. And then he goes and does the same thing. I'll do better. I'll do better. Goes and does the same thing. After a while, you get sick of hearing the excuse that we'll do better, and then nothing gets done. So, yeah. Some residential school survivors are younger than I am, just to examine how recent these issues are. Yeah. Yeah. Like, yeah, I know. Like when the Trayvon Martin thing happened, I was in college, and if you're familiar with the story of what happened, like he was significantly younger than me. So it's so sad to see because it's like I'm watching literal children die on the news. Which is it's it's so much to take in because like children, like Trayvon Martin was a child when that happened. Let me pull this up. He was 17 years old. He was 17 years old when he was shot to death in 2012. A child. And this is a lot because like there's a lot of children that either go missing, they're shot, they die, they get abducted, and the fact that most of them are minorities is definitely an extreme example of systemic racism taking place. How could it not be? How can you turn a blind eye and be like, oh, this isn't happening? How could you do that just to it makes me uncomfortable, so I'm going to deny the reality of what's happening. And the reality of what's happening is the police are killing Black children and Indigenous children and Indigenous women. And I can never wrap my head around these people who are willing to pretend like none of this is happening, and you see it happening all the time. Like, they just completely turn a blind eye to it. And this is exactly how fascists end up taking powers, because enough of the public is willing to turn a blind eye to what's happening. All right, so this is the last article. We're going to get through this, guys. All right. Yes, there is systemic racism in Canada. Our history is filled with it. Some people will not hear you regardless of how truthfully you speak. They will not hear you regardless of how loudly or loving or profoundly you speak, because they do not want to. That is what the one-sided conversation around racism in Canada feels like, one that is falling on deaf ears. It is exhausting to repeatedly explain that racism exists in Canada. It is tiresome to constantly be told to go back home by the same people who deny its very existence. Yet here we are. In 2020, Rex Murphy and others are still continually given the megaphone to wax poetic on Canada that it is free of sin. It is a dangerous thing because their privilege is blinding. For Canadians to have likely never experienced systemic racism, it is easy to deny its existence. That makes it easy for them to make smug remarks about our neighbors to the south that would never happen here, or we're so much better than that, because they are personally so far removed from oppressive situations. They fail to recognize the parallels, including the police brutality that is happening here at home. Most Canadians know the names George Floyd, Ahmaud Arbery, and Trayvon Martin. Why do so few know about Black Canadians like DeAndre Campbell, Nicholas Gibbs, Orlando Brown, etc., who have also died at the hands of police? Why are Black Torontonians 20 times more likely to be shot by police than the city's white residents? Why do Black people in Toronto account for 25% of police-involved shootings when they make up only slightly more than 8.8% of the population? Ontario Premier Doug Ford recently stated that Canada doesn't have the same systemic deep roots of racism that the United States does. He has since redacted that statement, but his initial unfiltered words prove a telling point that our country's racist past, which continues to be felt by people of color, and particularly Black and Indigenous communities, is not something that white privileged people give much thought to without a prompt, because it doesn't directly impact their lives. But that's the thing. It does impact their lives. Through generational wealth, access to higher education, positions of leadership, influence, and power from a system that is upheld by ideologies of white supremacy, the proof is in our history books. Between 1628 and the 1800s, 3,000 people of African ancestry who were enslaved in the United States were brought to Canada and forced to live here in slavery. The Slavery Abolition Act didn't officially become a law in Canada until 1834, just 27 years before the American Civil War. From 1886 to 1996, 150,000 First Nations Inuit and Métis children were taken from their families and forced to attend residential schools. The trauma of residential schools and 60s scoop is still being felt today. From 1881 to 1884, 17,000 Chinese laborers came to work on the Canadian Pacific Railway. Many died during the construction upon completion. Canada introduced a head tax that applied to only Chinese immigrants after collecting $23 million through the head tax between 1885 and 1923. Canada closed the door to Chinese immigrants until 1947. In 1939, Canada turned away the MS St. Louis, an ocean liner carrying 907 Jewish refugees forced back to Europe. 254 of the passengers later died in the Holocaust. Yikes. During the Second World War, the Canadian government forced 2,000 Japanese people, 75% of them Canadian citizens, into internment camps. So you guys did the internment camp thing too. After the war, Canada continued with a range of policies that made it difficult, if not impossible, for people of color to immigrate from Asia, Africa, Latin America, and the Caribbean. It wasn't until 1976 that a point system was introduced, which allowed for fairer immigration policy. Even so, the last segregated school in Canada in Guysborough County did not close until 1983. In 1983, 2 years after I immigrated to Canada from England, my own experiences with racism here began. I was 5 years old at the time. Yikes. From our start in Brantford, Ontario, I got used to regularly hearing the word, I'm not going to say it, even on my wedding day. It's a racial slur, and I've linked the article in the comments, so if you guys want to read it, go for it. I'm not going to say the slur. How one Black mother is preparing her son for life in today's world, being born untouchable in the Hindu caste system. My family has been deeply affected by caste systems. Okay, so this is an Indian. He is originally from India, and then he came to Canada when he was much younger. Being born and untouchable in the Hindu caste system, my family has been deeply affected by caste and classism, racism. Yeah, see, like, if you want to look at this, like, you can look at the fact that this is occurring in almost every colonialist nation, or any nation that was founded on colonialism has, like, some kind of systemic racism happening within its societal structure. And the problems in India are really bad as well. My grandparents were not permitted to attend school in the era of segregation. My father had to sit at the back of the classroom and was not called by his name, but simply BC for backward class. He was not permitted to upper caste homes, stores, places of worship, public gatherings. Yeah. Coming to Canada would mean better life, he thought. But that trauma has been passed down generation to generation. It's a legacy that's still being felt today. While we don't experience it in the same overt ways, those ideologies of power and privilege persist right here in Canada. All that said, I recognize my own privilege and the insidious racial hierarchy of white supremacy, which has treated my Black friends and family far worse in this country, even leaving some dead. Yeah. So, yeah, I mean, there's a lot. There's a lot to all of this, guys. So yeah, we're gonna talk a little bit about this. So like, I don't see how people can just ignore this at this point, because you see examples of it in almost every colonialist nation, like I said, or every nation with a colonialist type founding, or an imperialist type founding. There's definitely social structures of systemic racism happening. That is the trend that I've been seeing lately. So if you're not American and you're from some other colonialist nation, and you want to lend your voice to like the fact that, yeah, there's systemic racism in my country too, it's not better, please add your voice in the comments, because I would certainly love to hear, your stories and how it's similar or how it differs, so that we can continue to go into this more, because I do believe that it's important. It's important for us to understand these issues, and it's because if we don't understand them, how are we going to tackle them? How are we going to dismantle these powers of oppression that have plagued our societies for, like I said, hundreds of years, maybe if not thousands of years, in some cases. Certainly in the case for India, it's been happening for thousands of years. Okay. So, I mean, I'm going to wrap up, guys, because I've gone on for like almost about an hour now. If you guys have anything you'd like to add, or if you would like to suggest more topics for me to cover in the future, please like and subscribe and hit the bell so you'll get notified. So you'll get notified when I'm going live next. And don't forget to tell your friends. So yeah, and if you want to suggest, content, topics in the future, you can either, put it in the comments, or you can hit me up on Twitter. All right, guys. Have a good one. Natty out.